how do we handle this, human bee conflict. That would be the flow. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and yeah, we can pause and take questions in between. And yeah, I mean, with that, I hand it over back to Dr. Axel and Dr. Smita. Over to you.
Yeah, as already Axel mentioned, we are going to be talking about this project on exploring and managing human bee conflict in Bangalore.
This one, and maybe you have to. Okay, wait a second. Do it this way. Sorry.
Okay. The outline already was discussed. So I would start with pollination and importance of Apis dorsata. So, this isn't working. Could you please? So as you all probably already know, pollinators are extremely important, and in fact, about more than 80% of wild flowering plants globally are animal pollinated. And it's more so in the tropics. Pollinators are not only important for wild plants, it's also important for many of the crops. Of course, cereals and legumes are not really dependent on pollinators, but around 70% of global major food crops are dependent on pollinators. And the dependency can be anywhere between 1 to 100%. 100% is where pollinators are essential in setting fruits. And in some species, such as the Robusta coffee that we have studied, around 33% is a contribution of bees, while 67% is a contribution of wind pollination. And it is not just the yield that the pollinator contributes to, it's also the quality of the fruit itself. So if you've ever bought strawberries, you would have noticed some of the fruits are misshapen and they don't look very nice. They have some, like the one right at the bottom you see, which is self-pollinated. They are not fully developed because some of the seeds are not developed because of insufficient pollination. While in the case of hand and open pollination, they are very well set. It's a nice complete fruit. And this is something you would have also noticed in custard apple. Yeah. And it is estimated that the value of crop pollination services ranges between 200 to 600 billion US dollars globally. And in India, it's about $22 billion. And what we also notice is over the last couple of decades, the dependency on pollinator-dependent crops has steadily increased. That's mainly because many of these pollinator-dependent crops are extremely nutritious, and that's why we are moving towards crops that are more nutrient-rich, and they are pollinator-dependent in setting fruit. So why does this really matter? As you know, pollinators are important for forest resilience of forests, because more than 90% of the wild plants depend on pollinators for fruit set. Crops are extremely important in providing pollination services, and is important for pest management, and is important in terms of water regulation, so water for crops, important in climate mitigation, and also conserves huge amount of genetic diversity, which includes also crop wild relatives. And that's why it's important for our food security in a big way. So to summarize, the take-home message here is pollination is important, very important for our nutritional security. It's not just food security, it is nutritional security. It's important for forest resilience and thus a healthy living, and honeybees are important pollinators. I gave you an example of coffee where bees contribute to around 33% of the yields, and one of the main pollinators of coffee in India is Apis dorsata. So Apis dorsata plays an important role in many crop pollinations in India. So with that, I pass it on to Axel.
Yeah, are there any questions? No? Vishnu? We cannot see it at the moment, whether there are questions.
I do not see any questions.
There are no questions right now.
Okay, good. Then I'm going ahead, yeah?
Yeah, please.
So the second part is about Apis dorsata, the giant honeybee colonies in Bangalore. First of all, you have to understand, I mean, there are a lot of bees, and we think there's about 700 to 800 bee species. And among these bee species, there are about 5 to 6 honeybee species in India. But it's only Apis dorsata that gets into a conflict with humans. And it gets into a conflict with humans because it has several unique characters that it separates from the other honeybee species. One is that they are nesting in aggregations in trees and in cliffs. Because they are nesting in cliffs, actually high-rise apartment buildings are like attractive nesting sites for them. Then they have preferred nesting sites, actually, and that is probably what you all have observed, that in an apartment complex, colonies are nesting each year at the same place. It is not necessarily that these colonies are the same colonies from the year before. It is that this place where they are nesting is preferred. And we can discuss about this in the question and answer session. And then, most importantly, Apis dorsata is the only honeybee species that is capable of flying at and foraging at low light intensities. That means it can fly in the twilight, and it can fly in the moonlit nights. And in the moonlit nights, the foragers get attracted to lights, and that is when they are coming into your apartment. And then they get stuck at the light. And all the other honeybee species don't do that. So here are a data set that that my lab has generated. And here you see on the left panel, you see the foraging, the arrival rate, which means the foraging activity at different moon phases. And the blue line indicates twilight, the yellow line indicates the daylight foraging activity, and the black line indicates the foraging activity in the night. And here you can see that during the full moon and a little bit in the waning moon, foraging activity in the night gets higher, but all over, in all the different moon phases, it is the twilight activity that is the most. So we think that they have adapted to flying at low light intensities during twilight, and is an epiphenomenon that then, and during the full moon, the light intensity is sufficient that they also can fly in moonlight. And here you can see it's a different plot, the activity. In a new moon, you see only flight activity here in this bluish phases. This is the twilight, and during the day. A half moon, you can see, and that's the waning moon, you can see that there's a foraging activity in the second half of the night and during the day. And here in full moon, you can see that they are active during the full time. And then we did a study to identify the annual life cycle of Apis dorsata colonies in Bangalore. Annual life cycle means when are the colonies coming to the nesting sites, when are they leaving, when do the honeybee colonies produce swarms. So the reproduction of honeybees is done by swarming, and so we want to follow the colonies through the year. And we did a study at these Nico homes in northern Bangalore. Here you can see a photo, kind of like three Apis dorsata colonies. The whole complex is a 10-tower complex. And here the black and the yellow dots kind of indicate where we saw the nesting sites. And kind of the yellow marks mean kind of nesting sites where we saw over 2 or 3 years kind of colonies nesting. And this figure shows you now the change in the abundance of colonies nesting at this nesting site. Let's start kind of here in mid-August, September, October. We see a low number of colonies. That is kind of like the major time of the monsoon in Bangalore. And then shortly after, kind of like then and the red line indicates the rain, right? So after the monsoon in November and October, we see a strong increase in the colonies that come to the nesting site. And that holds them for January, and then we see a small decline, but the most decline occurs during the monsoon, in the monsoon phases. So, and this has been kind of shown in earlier studies for different areas in Bangalore. Now, what we then did is, and that hasn't been done before, is counting the colonies that are arriving or departing in the months. And that shows us a more kind of, shows us better the dynamic of the colonies coming to the nesting sites. And here again in blue, you see kind of the phase of the monsoon. And here in November, kind of like the black columns are arrivals or arriving colonies, and the gray colors are kind of departing colonies. So you see an increase, a strong increase in November. That is when the colonies come back. And in recent years, this was a little bit delayed, and we saw kind of like an increase in January. Then what you also see is that that at this nesting site, there's a strong kind of departure in February. And this is kind of like correlates with a shift in the flowering season. So we see kind of, so there's a flowering season from, I think, November to January, with a little break in February. And then in March, April, May, we have the major flowering season. And we are sure that this increase in April, the increase in colonies and arriving colonies, has something to do also with swarming, with the reproductive phase. So we think that between February and April, kind of the colonies get bigger in the number of workers that they have, and that is needed so that they can divide kind of the colony and swarm. What is also important to see is that actually, even during the monsoon, sometimes colonies are arriving. And only in June and August, we have periods where we see more departing. And I think that is also what you can observe, that so already in June, May, June, some kind of colonies are disappearing, but most of the colonies are finally gone by August. And what was very interesting to us was that actually most of the colonies at that nesting site only stayed for 1 to 3 months. We thought actually that kind of like, or when we started the study, we thought that the colonies were kind of like staying from November till kind of like the monsoon, but this is not happening. And the colonies kind of like stay only 1 to 3 months. And we think that these colonies are more migratory than so far expected, and they kind of change the nesting site. So we call it, they relocate their nest when, for example, food availability is declining. And I kind of like said it, that there is a decline in food availability around February. On the right side, the figure is a little bit more complicated. It shows kind of like how long colony stays depending on the months that they are arriving. So, let's start with October, September, October, November, December. That is kind of like colonies that are coming kind of like at the end of the monsoon. And these colonies kind of, a high percentage of these colonies can stay for 4 to 5 months. When the colonies are coming in May, June, July, shortly before the monsoon, most of the colonies only stay for 1 to 2 months. Yeah? So depending on their arrival, there's a connection between, an association between when the colonies arrive and how long they stay. That might have to do something. Colonies that might arrive in September, October, maybe also kind of are stronger. And because they are stronger, they might kind of like stay, kind of like, they don't relocate the nested when there's a small decline of the food availability in February.
Dr. Axel, there was a question raised, a hand raised by Yogesh.
Okay.
Can we take the question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Yogesh, please go ahead with the question. Yogesh, you're on mute if you're asking a question.
Or maybe he writes it into the chat and you read.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will do that. But at the moment, I don't see anything in the chat. So maybe you can please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, good. Then I'm going ahead.
Yeah, sure.
So the take-home message is that Apis dorsata is unique among honeybees in that it can fly and forage at low light conditions. And it's attracted to build their nest at high-rise buildings, right? And under natural condition, they are nesting in large trees and in cliffs. So if you are living in an apartment complex, you are actually kind of attracting the honey. That is important for you to understand. So you are attracting them. So kind of like how to say, so how to say, you cannot get rid of them fully. You have to kind of learn to live with them. Second, we see during the period from February to April that many colonies will grow in size and they will reproduce. And as biologists, we would say that eradication of colonies during that phase when they are kind of like doing their reproduction is biologically not that good. And then when mostly the people see the colonies and they see, and everyone knows that the colonies are not there during the monsoon, but actually our study has shown where we really kind of like observed individual colonies, that the individual colonies only stay for 2 months, 1 to 3 months at a nesting site and then might migrate. Yeah, if there's, that was the second part. If there's a question, I can answer.
Yeah, well, one question, Dr. Axel. So is it why could you explain why the reason why they choose a specific nesting site? For instance, even in my apartment, right? Every year I get a nesting for a month. I mean, just right in front of my utility. It's an inaccessible place, and then they disappear, and then they come again to the same spot next year, right? So, so the question is, why do they choose such spots? The second part is it the same set of bees that come to the same spot again, or is it a different colony? Okay, so the second question, it can be the same colony, but it does not necessarily need to be the same colony. And people will observe that if you kind of like remove a colony at a site, then you will get another colony coming to that same site a few months ago. And so it cannot be the same colony because the first colony was eradicated. Why? So how to say, we know that they have preferred nesting sites, but how they choose a nesting site, we don't know. And probably that's kind of like a $1 million question. But
there are two things, kind of like, how to say, sometimes at the nesting site, there are still the leftovers of the comb of the previous colony. Yeah. So and how to say, it's like humans, kind of, you know, how to say. So where there has been already a colony, it means it must be a good place.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but we also kind of like have seen that if you remove the whole comb, still there are marks at the ceiling, kind of small wax blobs, and one has to just go close to it, and then one can see it. And these wax blobs are probably very permanent. So even if the comb was removed, these wax blobs might be there, and these wax blobs could be used by the scouts that are searching for a nest site, that this was that there was a colony before, and this is a good locality. But so we also have 3 colonies sites here on NCBS campus, and for example, we have a large balcony, and the colonies are always nesting only on the left side. Why they do that, we don't know. And to study it would need a kind of like, how to say, a large study, right? So to figure it out, it could be kind of like micro environmental, kind of like wind. What we know is that they like to kind of be at least sheltered to some side. But okay, that is all speculation. The only important thing is that they have it. And if you have it on your colony, if you have a colony on your balcony, then your balcony is a preferred nesting site. Yeah. And we can talk later about what one can do about it.
Yeah, just to add to
Sure.
that, so I have worked in Kodagu and in the sacred forests of Kodagu. And there are certain trees which are really very tall out in, standing out in the canopy, which have easy access, have horizontal branches, a wide canopy. And it is these specific trees that they choose for nesting. And usually if this year I find, let's say 40 colonies, I would expect roughly the same number next year as well. So probably the same colonies are coming back, but like Axel said, when a colony is killed, probably another colony from one of those which has split into 2 maybe is coming back. We don't know. It is again speculation, like Axel mentioned.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add.
Got it, man. So there are 2 other questions in the chat. One is by Sudhanshu Gupta. He asks, what is the lifespan of an individual Apis dorsata? What is the lifespan? That's one question. And second question is this phenomena where we see their nests in high-rise buildings specific to Bangalore? Those are the 2 questions from Sudhanshu.
Okay, good. The second question is easier to answer. No, it is not special to Bangalore. We would expect it in many Indian cities. Yeah. And high-rise building high-rise buildings construction is kind of like, at the moment, I would say the favorite construction way for probably economic reasons, right? If you think about the construction builders and the companies. But for example, there is on the way to the airport, there is this stone, how do you call it?
Quarry.
Yeah, the quarry. And sometimes in that quarry, which is a cliff, similar to it's a stone cliff, and the cliff in a high-rise building, you can see even kind of colonies nesting there in this quarry.
Oh.
The other question was, how long do Apis dorsata foragers live? So we don't know that exactly. What we know is that, or what we think is that, okay, I have to make it a little bit different. So from Apis mellifera, we know how long Apis mellifera bees workers live during the summertime, and that is 6 weeks. And they live 3 weeks in the hive, and 3 weeks they work as a forager. We expect that that Apis dorsata workers stay in the nest up to kind of like 50 to 70 days. And then when they become forager, we don't know for how long they still live. The problem is that if you are a forager, you are leaving the hive, your mortality risk is increasing, right? Then kind of like you are exposed to kind of birds that kind of want to eat you and kind of other kind of like insects or that want to eat you. And then you are working hard. So we don't know. They can live very long. That maybe if it's kind of like, if the question was asked with respect to, if we assume that a colony comes back to the same location, but and so it leaves in August and it comes back in December or so, that that still the bees, that there are still some of the bees living that were already living in the nesting site. So that can be. But I guess that, so it's a difficult question whether the bees, and that is of course a totally interesting biological phenomenon, whether a colony remembers a nesting site, and that would mean it can remember kind of like how it gets back to it, and or whether coming to the same locality can be kind of explained with lesser cognitive capabilities. So, right? I mean, if they can remember the nesting sites, then it would be something very similar to elephants that also kind of like have these walking paths and migratory paths that are kind of transferred from parents to children. But how to say? Honeybees, I want to make that point. Honeybees are the pinnacle of the evolution of the insect side. So one should be open to expect highest capabilities by them.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dr. Axel, for a lengthy answer. So I think, yeah, there is Sas Biswas who has raised his hand. Maybe Sas, you could go ahead and ask your question.
Well, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I stay in the Prestige Farms in Whitefield area of Bengaluru. Right now, I am in Dehradun, in northern India. So I have a group on forest and urban biodiversity while in Bengaluru and in South India. I contribute towards that group. Last I contributed towards the bee fauna. I was not able to identify the bee, but what I found, there were more foraging on bottle palm. The Prestige Farms where I do stay, that's about 12 years old apartment, and the trees are say about 10 years old and all. So when they flower, these come in large. Then very close to my Prestige Farm, there used to be coconut plantation. Now the coconut plantation has been cut and there's going to be a very multi-story apartment. And opposite to this, my Prestige Farm, where they make about 4 colonies, there are trees of Australian acacia and then babool, acacia nilotica. So they are also the forest, but the maximum they do that. Just what I would like to know, whether can we think of making some kind of a terrace corridor for making the bees more attractive towards such plants. They can have it, but for the colony they can go as well. The direction of the apartment is southeast. So also no east, east, southeast. So on eastern side, western side, they are making the colonies, and they are the 4 colonies, and they remain there for say 2-3 months, and after that they come back again. The following period, say they remain up to month of September, and they go. So I'd just like to know whether there is anything that has been done for that. For example, in case of North India, in Dehradun, where I am, I have grown the plant called Portulaca, and in the Portulaca, the ornamental one, the bees are coming by 8:30, they go off. But I do not find any colony of bees in any houses. Even on as a 5 or 6 story building also. But in Bengaluru, I find that invaluable. And now the question comes: we are concerned about the bees. We have got the International Pollinator Initiative, but how we can, speak to those apartments authorities who are, putting the pesticides and killing them, and they don't understand about those. So how that is the very important question. We understand about the
Sure.
bees. We must feel concerned about it. But when it comes to the say Sarjapur Road apartment or zone and all, there are several cases of their bees stinging the children and all, and they put the order, they finish them and all. I try to stop it. So, but they do come, and how to do that? How we
Sure.
make the
I
aware
think
to the people?
Mr. Sas Biswas, thanks for that. I mean, I see there are a lot of questions also in the chat with respect to in terms of human bee conflict as such, right? So I see a lot of questions in the chat as well. But I think for that reason, maybe can we take these questions after Dr. Axel Smita's presentation on the last topic, because that would hopefully answer many of these questions. And yeah, the bee behavior and how can we avoid the conflict and things like that, right? So we can. They also kindly shared as a guide.
I'm not after killing them. I'm not after the pesticide and all. I would love to have the terrace corridor for such buildings where we can develop some floristics for inviting them.
Yeah, I think as Vishnu suggested, we can come back to this question at the end, right? I mean, the question was, are there kind of mechanisms to divert, if I understood right, to divert the colonies away from the apartment buildings, right? But we can come to that question at the end. Maybe
can we answer that question now, please?
What?
Can we answer that question now, please?
So, okay, there is no experience at the moment with it, as far as I know.
I don't know if you can in any way make the bees that are nesting on apartment buildings to move to a tree. These bees do prefer certain species of trees such as ficus, also jamun, syzygium, also Mycelia champaka, which is when it is really huge. So there are certain trees that they do prefer in forests. So it's possible that planting some of these trees would.
Wouldn't you just cover your apartment building with honey?
Pardon?
Cover your apartment building with honey?
What would that help?
I think it was a gate crashing of what we call yeah, so I think it's some random spam people, they come in. I just noticed, I think his name was Jackson Dorothy. I just removed him from the meeting. It happens. Sometimes they use cuss words. This guy was
kind of like using. You should not do it with honey. You should it with salty water.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I removed him. So I don't know who allowed him. So yeah, sure.
Okay, kind of Smita, you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead with the last topic. Yeah.
Yeah, the last topic is why we are here today. So I would next slide, please. So as Axel already mentioned, we are many of us are afraid of Apis dorsata bees because they inflict painful stings. I think most of these points Axel has already mentioned. So I'd go to the next slide. And yeah, so the main goals of our project is mainly estimating how many colonies really are there in Bangalore, because this is information that we don't have. And we also would like to know how many of these colonies get eradicated, what proportion of them are removed, and how are they removed. Why do they prefer certain locations for nesting? What makes certain apartments much more attractive than others? Are there environmental factors such as the surrounding land use? The surrounding land use that plays a role in that. And could Mr. Vishwas mute himself?
ठीक है बिल्कुल ये अभी जो काम है ना उसमें
Okay, and the last point is Axel has more experience in this. He would be discussing about strategies to reduce the number of colonies being killed and how it can be accomplished. So to start off, I would like to give you an overview as to how we did density estimation. So we did a density estimation in Bangalore urban district. We laid grids of 1.5 by 1.5 kilometer squares, and we randomly picked about 10% of those squares, and we scanned through the, we used the roads mainly to go around the region and count the number of colonies that are present within this 2.25 square kilometers. And what we found was, so we have completed the survey, and what we found was most of these squares had Apis dorsata colonies. The blue ones are the ones with colonies, and the black dots are the ones without colonies. And the graph here shows the number of colonies per nesting site. So we have come across up to 7 colonies per nesting site. And we counted about 426 colonies in 236 nesting sites. And the density of colonies is about 1.8 colonies per square kilometers. It's okay, yeah. So there are similar studies from other areas, but in natural habitats, and the number of colonies ranges from 1 to 3 colonies per square kilometer, something similar to what we have in a city like Bangalore. But these are in natural habitats, in Apis mellifera colonies, not in Apis dorsata. I don't think anybody's worked on Apis dorsata yet. So what we see here is these graphs show that buildings and trees are the most preferred nesting sites. But although the number of nesting sites are higher amongst trees, the number of colonies that you find on buildings is much higher. That's what the second graph shows. So to answer some of these questions, we prepared a survey, a questionnaire, which is in form of Google form, which I think some of you have already responded to. We received around 80 or 82 responses for that. And the main questions that we wanted to ask were how many apartment complexes have Apis dorsata colonies, and how do they really manage these colonies, and when and why, and when do they nest, and when do they make their presence felt? Basically, when do people really notice that these colonies are there, and when they are disturbed? So what we found was, okay, we had 81 participants, and 89% of them mentioned that they had nests, and about 11% mentioned that there were no nests. We would like to encourage people who don't have colonies also to respond to this questionnaire, so that we know what proportion of the apartments really have colonies and how many do harbor nests. So how are these colonies managed? That was another question that we asked, and in fact, a large proportion of respondents mentioned that they call beekeepers. And it is possible that many of these colonies do survive, not all of them, but many of them might survive if the queen is not killed. But around 27% mentioned that they call pest management companies, which means that these are surely they are not going to survive. And about 13% mentioned that it is variable. They either call beekeepers or pest management companies. Only about 2% mentioned that they don't disturb them and they just let them be. And this is what we hope. We are hoping that this percent would increase over the next couple of years, and we can help with that.
Okay, and I want to make the point that we were actually surprised by this result, because we thought that many more apartment complexes would call pest management. The question is, and I think Vishnu, that was a discussion, that it could be that some of the apartments, I mean, at least kind of Vishnu, you kind of said that that people asked if they would answer the question with pest management, whether that would have a negative effect on the apartment. So we are not sure at the moment whether this result is a little bit biased because people didn't mention that they use pest management. And I want to make a point here that we are only interested in getting the data, and it can be anonymously. But it is for us as scientists important that if we would kind of show such a figure, that the figure is actually kind of like giving what is really happening. So we can kind of discuss this in the question and answer session.
Yeah, we want to make sure that this result is reliable. And the last point that I wanted to make is we also, till now, what we have shown are the results of our preliminary study. What we would also want to find out is why do these colonies, why do these bees nest in certain regions? Is it because the surrounding landscape has a lot of forage? So in the first diagram here shows the center is a bee, and what we plan to do is at some of these apartments, we want to see what is the surrounding land use like. So what proportion of the land has green areas, roads, buildings, water bodies, etc. And want to see if these variables play a role in these bees choosing these locations as a preferred nesting site. We use a radius of about 3 kilometers because that is roughly the usual foraging range of the bees. And the next one is foraging map that Axel and team had prepared for another study. And here what was done is using the waggle dances. Probably that's something which is better explained by Axel. Using the waggle dances, we are able to find out how far and which direction the bees forage. And using that information, this map was prepared. You would be explaining.
Okay, yeah. So in this kind of graph, I mean, okay, in the background, you see a Google kind of map of Bangalore. The colony was basically placed on NCBS campus, and each of the dot indicates the communication of a food site by a foraging worker. And I will explain that in the next slide. But what you can see here, it's kind of like, of course, how to say, bees are opportunistic. When they find food close to their colony, they prefer that, right? Kind of no one wants to walk long to get kind of like the food. But they can also kind of fly, kind of like this is kind of almost 4 kilometers or 3 kilometers away. And you see already that, so this dark black area is the campus of the agricultural university, which is used by crop planting. And that is actually not where they are kind of searching for food. Actually, they are searching here in the residential areas. And one reason is that has been also shown for other honeybee species that actually residential areas are attractive because of gardening. And gardening means that you have a lot of kind of diverse plants and probably also flowering plants during the whole year. We can get these foraging maps because of the dance language. And the dance language is one of this kind of like real fantastic phenomena in biology. So the forager can communicate the food location to a nestmate in the hive. And it uses kind of a waggle dance. Kind of the next slide shows you a dancing forager. So the waggle dance kind of like it exists of a phase what we call the waggle run phase, where kind of like the forager kind of waggling this abdomen kind of moves a straight line. And the idea is that the duration of that waggle run phase correlates with the distance of the food source, and the angle of the waggle run with respect to the perpendicular indicates the direction of the food source from the hive with respect to the sun. And so the dance angle can be easily measured. For the waggle run duration, one needs a calibration curve. That means kind of we are training kind of bees, and here you can see in yellow, this is a calibration curve for Apis dorsata. What we do is we train foragers to 100, 200, 300, 400, and 500 meters. And then we kind of like record the duration of the waggle run. And so this kind of gives you kind of like a waggle run duration with respect to distance of the food source. And we can use this calibration curve to decipher kind of like the waggle runs of a colony, and then kind of like can kind of estimate the distance and the direction where they have flown. And with that, we come to such a foraging map. And so that you can see how a dance looks like. You can see here an Apis dorsata colony, and here in the middle, kind of like this will be the forager that is dancing, and this kind of white dot that you can see hopefully is basically a pollen storage that she had collected. And I hope that now the transmission of the video will go well. That's kind of waggle run and waggle run and waggle run. I can play it once again, and you see that kind of like other kind of workers are trying to kind of follow and perceive the dance signals. Waggle run, return run, waggle run, waggle run. And as I said, that we can record it and we can decode it. That's the way we do it. Okay, good. This is now the end of our talk. So as kind of Smita already kind of indicated, for our study, we would need more people, more apartment complexes to do the questionnaire. And we can discuss how to do that.
Yeah.
And
sure.
And wait a minute, so now we're coming, so there's another one. And of course, as also already indicated, we can help you with your honeybee problems. And okay, so sorry. So I've sent to Vishnu a small PDF file, and I can give you just kind of, I will not read this all, but I can give you a very brief basic thing. So so the best thing would be, of course, not to remove the colonies. But if you prefer to remove the honeybee colonies, there are kind of like three things to consider. So the first thing is, it would be the best not to call pest management, because they're using pesticides or other poisons to kill the colony. There are kind of like less harmful ways to remove a colony. And one that I prefer is the following way. A bee remover comes, he is smoking the colony. That means that the workers of the colony are leaving the comb. The comb gets exposed and can be removed by the bee remover. When he has removed the comb, the colony comes back to that same site because the colony does not know that their comb is away. The colony comes back and kind of like settles where the comb was. That's an important problem for the apartment resident. So if the colony comes back and it comes back and it builds a swarm. From the outside, it looks as if there is still the colony with the comb. The colony comes back and then it realizes that the comb is away. And this is a kind of like strong, kind of like negative experience, so to speak. But the colony has to get kind of aware that the comb is not there. And then the colony makes the decision to leave that place. Before the colony can leave that place, it sends out scouts, bees that are searching for a new nesting site. And then these scouts are searching in different directions. And then the scouts have to decide which nesting site they prefer. And then they convince the colony. This whole decision process might take 3 to 5 days. But then the colony will certainly leave. Yeah. So that is of course a problem, because if you call someone to remove the colony, you really want to see at the end of the day that the colony is gone. But in this procedure, the colony is not gone, and kind of like you need to be patient. So now the third thing is that if you had a colony nesting on your balcony, or kind of like other kind of like overhangs where you don't want them to be, that after you have removed a colony, you have to kind of, because it's preferred nesting site, and I said that the probability that a different colony comes to that specific nesting site is very high. So what you have to do is you have to kind of like prepare the ceiling that a new colony cannot attach a comb to the ceiling. That can actually be easily done by kind of like by putting in a kind of like putting a mesh kind of like 5 centimeters below the ceiling. We did that with, for example, with just mosquito nets. These might not be kind of like visually kind of nice, but I think that there can be kind of found, you can have a metal mesh that you can kind of color in the same way of the ceiling. That's just kind of like a few centimeters below the ceiling. That then the colony cannot attach its comb to the ceiling. That is important. The other way, if you kind of kill a colony and you don't do that, you will have a colony next year, or even kind of in a few months later. That is kind of my general kind of advice. But we are happy to take questions and kind of discuss the problematic with you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Dr. Axel. So yeah, I think I'll go to some of the questions. I think there's this question from Sita that says, what is the best way to deal with stray honeybees entering your home in the nights because they are attracted to artificial light in the house? That's also in the guide Dr. Axel has shared, Sita. So the simple solution mentioned there was switch off the lights in the house, turn on some light in the balcony. They're attracted to the light, they will go out, right? So that's one solution that was provided. And
let me tell you one other thing. So it is a light intensity that attracts the bees. So these kind of like very white neon lamps are highly attractive. If you have more yellowish light, then that is not sufficient. So and I think so. The problem will only be mainly in summer months when the nights are warm, and when there's flowering, because then they're kind of actively also searching in the night. And so how to say, and then it's a mixture of kind of like the lighting in the apartment, the opening of windows or kind of balcony doors. And but with some experience, you should be able to do that. And if you have them, then kind of like switch off the light and maybe kind of put out light outside on the balcony, and then you will see that immediately they will fly outside. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Thanks. The next question is another question of Shantanu. What's the usual habitat of the bee-eater birds? One sees them mostly in the suburbs or rural or semi-rural areas. Do these birds make habitat in urban areas?
I have not seen bee eaters, at least in the middle of the city, but I've seen drongos which also feed on bees.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So then there was another question from Arun that says, are human beings only threat to beehives or anything else as well? That's the first question. Second question is, what's your opinion on apiculture? May not be very natural way of producing honey. What's your take on this? Okay, let me kind of make kind of like a really fundamental statement. So apis, so one thing is, so apis, honeybees are animals, right? So you have to treat kind of like a honeybee colony similar as you would treat a dog that you see on the street. Yeah. So a colony is only defending itself if it is threatened. And unfortunately, kind of most cases of where kind of like you have these newspaper reports where kind of like an Apis dorsata swarm is kind of like attacking humans was after the colony was threatened. And I have heard about kind of children's kind of liking to throw stones at a colony. So how to say, so the colony will not attack you if they don't feel a threat. So of course, throwing a stone or something like that is a super threat. Of course, there could be something that gets that will agitate the colony that you are not aware of. For example, it could be with specific odors that we don't know. So how to say, so someone is cooking something and maybe this, for whatever reason, there's an odor that is really agitating the bees. In general, I think that Apis dorsata colonies, so let's put it this way. I can accept that people are afraid of them, right? But in general, dorsata colonies are not really super aggressive. And the problem is, if they get agitated, they defend the nest with a swarm of hundreds of bees. And then how to say, and then when you are getting kind of stung by a lot of bees, that might harm yourself. More kind of like how to say, most harmful for the human is actually an anaphylactic shock. That means that the immune response is kind of like too strong. And then you can kind of like how to say, if you get stung in the neck area, and then that whole thing is swelling, then you might have a problem with kind of breathing. In a sting of a honeybee is certainly not kind of like a threatening to your human health. Having said so, I lost kind of my. So
second question.
What the second question was?
Yeah, the second question was, what's your opinion on apiculture? May not be a very natural way of producing honey.
Apiculture is not a nice way of producing honey.
Yeah, what's your opinion is the question.
On that, Axel, I think
Oh,
I have.
huh? I mean, how to say, we are gardeners. We are kind of like we have husbandry. We have kind of made nature kind of like, or we have learned to deal with nature to our kind of benefit. And I think that's still okay. Whether there are different ways kind of like of husbandry and or apiculture, particularly in the Western world, that is then a different question.
Well, there are studies which say that when you have lots of colonies of honeybees, it affects the native wild bees in a big way in terms of competition for forage. Yeah, it is it is a debatable issue. You want honey, maybe it's a better way to rear the bees and without killing them, harvest the honey, while in the wild, it's very likely that you would kill quite a lot of bees to collect the honey. So yeah,
but also you have to say that so beekeepers are important for pollination of large areas of crop fields. Yeah, so if honeybees are there are 20,000 bee species worldwide, and there are only 10 or 11 honeybee species. But the honeybee are very perfect for pollinating agricultural kind of landscapes, because you can put, because kind of like how to say, I mean, Apis cerana and Apis mellifera, you can put them, you can put them in boxes, bring them where you need them, and then you bring them in that huge amount that you can kind of pollinate the whole field. Yeah, and that is the importance, and that is also the economic importance of honeybees. And one has to kind of say that agriculture in this way is more in northern India with large fields. Generally, farming, you have in India a lot of small farms, and then kind of like how to say, and we don't know. So the problem is that we have five species of honeybees, and only with one can do beekeeping, and the others are wild, and we have no idea how important these wild honeybee species are for pollination. The only thing that is what we know is that they are certainly very important, and one has to do something for that. The problem is kind of like how to say, why is the Western world kind of like leading in kind of like conservation of honeybees? That is because most of the colonies in the Western world belong to beekeepers, which are making money. Pollination in India by wild honeybees is actually free of cost. And kind of no one is losing money, so no one is asking for conservation of these honeybees. But how to say, if the honeybees are not there anymore, then the pollination is going down. It's clear that one has to do something for the conservation of these honeybee species.
Yeah, for apple pollination in Himachal, these managed bees are used in a big way. They are transported also there. And in the US, you probably have heard about almond pollination. They are transported during the almond flowering season in a big way, because it's close to 100% dependent on bees for pollination. So yes, they are very important in terms of crop pollination, but the question was more about honey production, and yeah.
That's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think, in the interest of time, so we are almost 1 hour, 10 minutes into the meeting. Maybe I'll just try to wrap it with 3 questions, and then we'll take the questions in a different way by email or something. So yeah, I think just I'll take the last 3 points. So it's a question from H. Verma. Some bees' lifespan is 6 weeks. Apis dorsata is long, as Dr. Axel said. How to identify different species? Is it as simple as a layman imagination? Or I think the question is, we learned a lot about Apis dorsata. Is it almost certain that what we see in apartment buildings is mainly Apis dorsata in Bangalore? I think maybe I'm just trying to refine that question.
Well, Axel, correct me if I'm wrong. There are two kinds of nests that you see. In Serena, it's a cavity nesting bee, while Apis dorsata and Apis florea are open nesting. So you see the colonies, it is exposed. So it's visually you can see it. While Apis serena usually nests in holes, tree holes, or termite mounds. So it is usually not visible from the outside. So what you see on apartments is, exposed colonies. You saw some of the pictures that we showed, is 100% Apis dorsata.
Yeah, one has to say that Apis florea, it's called the dwarf honeybee. So it's a very small honeybee. And actually they are nesting in bushes. So maybe you have it, but then you have it in bushes in your apartment complex compound. And they are not a super threat, but so they are hiding, right? Because monkeys love to get the honey from Apis florea nests. So they are hiding, and the exposed nests that you see everywhere in India, in the cities, that is always Apis dorsata. What you then can have, kind of like what Smita also said, Apis cerana might nest in kind of cavities in kind of like the buildings, but you can also have stingless bees that nest in these crevices of buildings. But so they are not stinging, they are biting, and but that is not a major threat.
And there are lots of solitary bees which are also found all around Bangalore, nesting in small holes and dried stems, all kinds of places.
Sure. Okay, thanks. That leaves me with the last probably 2 points. One, I think Sheila Lewis, she had asked, I think, her question was, we live in a society next to CPRA forest. So we often have to deal with beehives. What is the safest way to chase them away? We usually call a person to use and smoke and chase them. I think it's a kind of a bit of a repeat question or an older question. Maybe I would direct to the, let's say the to the PDF file that was shared. We will upload in the BF knowledge base. It can be available in BF portal as well as the app. And any final comment on that, Dr. Smith or Dr. Axel? Before I hand it over to Srini Rao, he wanted to make one point. Yeah. So
I want to say one point. So I would always kind of like suggest to remove colonies by smoking and cutting the comb. However, kind of like I'm not a fundamentalist. If kind of like for whatever reason, kind of like you want to, you need to kill, then kind of like, then do it. But think twice whether you need to do it. And the most importantly is kind of like, don't call every year pest management. Kind of think long-term and kind of like how to say, if you have a colony and you have a colony nesting at a site where you don't want it, then try to do kind of like to prevent that colonies are nesting there. Given that kind of like Apis dorsata, which is also called cliff honeybee, is attracted to high-rise buildings, you kind of like how to say, have also to kind of like realize that you have to live with them. Leave them at the sites where they don't kind of threaten immediately. Learn how to be kind of like to behave when you have a colony. Then don't agitate colonies. Remove them if it's necessary, but then do something to the ceiling. And when kind of like how to say what I said about in the summer nights, when it is warm and you want to open the balcony, maybe just lower the lights inside. Don't use the lightest kind of neon. And if you have the bees, then switch off the light and put out a light at the balcony. And importantly is that, I understand, so how to say, these bees that are coming into your apartment, they are foragers. They are actually searching for food. They are not aggressors. What is kind of like making people afraid is that these bees are kind of flyers. So they fly to the light, bump against the light, and then they fly kind of like in a long kind of like a wave around the apartment, different to smaller insects that just stay close to the light. And this flight trajectory is unpredictable. So the bees then, and you can have that in corridors, so the bees are flying around the light, and then in the morning, because they're exhausted and they don't have any food reserves, they are kind of lying on the floor. And then they are kind of moving a little bit. In that phase, you can use a broom and just kind of like groom them away and put them in the waste or put them outside. Then kind of some birds that are there or whoever wants to eat them can eat them.
Yeah, got it. Thanks a lot. So I think in the end, I want to leave. I think Srini Rao wanted to make a point. So yeah, please go ahead, Srini.
Yeah, Professor, this is Srinivas from Nico Homes. It's a pleasure that you and me met one fine day where I ran to your office and said that yes, right. I ran to your office and said that I had a nest which was destroyed by the pest management organization, and we didn't know what to do. And then you visited Nico Homes, and then you made this session to educate people, and thereafter so much of research followed. And I'm also very happy to see some interesting trends. But the important thing that I wanted to share with this group out here is that it's great that BAF has initiated this initiative, and it's lovely. I can tell you that experience from Nico Homes, where when we started off, everybody was very fearful, not sure as to what is happening, and the situation as to whether we should let the pest management guys kill it, and so on and so forth. But today the scenario has changed, except that we have some challenges when there is a facilities management as a group which changes, and the people there may not be aware that how to drive or remove these hives. But there's a huge difference from what we had started off, and many of these colonies, at least there were 5 hives which every year were coming into my own balcony. Last 2 years, during the COVID season, I haven't had any hives coming into my own balcony. But the strategy that we adopted was that if any hive is there in the balcony, we remove it of the apartment. If there is any hive which is there on the attaching to the roof, but it is not accessible to anywhere, we leave it leave it like that, and we haven't had any accidents, but the learning process continues. So I must thank both Axel and Smita for taking this initiative. Thanks, and thanks, BAF.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Let me please respond to that. So, sure. Because with Srini, kind of our study on the annual life cycle started, and we are thankful, and you have seen that we have data now that we think to publish soon. And then the other thing is, I wanted to point out that that we are interested in getting more people in apartments to work on the questionnaire, and we can kind of like there are 2 ways to do it. We do it kind of like as we did it, where kind of like the people are indicating the address, but we can also agree to do it anonymously, in the sense that we are preparing a new a questionnaire, which is easier for us to analyze, kind of with yes and no answers or something like that. And we can give it to BAF, and BAF council can distribute it, and you could kind of like take care that that we get a lot of responses, and you might have the apartments for your kind of like accounting, so to speak, but you just give us the data as in numbers without apartments. I mean, it is what I say, as Smita kind of said, particularly. So there's two things. So the one is interesting for us to know how many apartments have colonies and how many do not have colonies on a kind of Bangalore-wide scale, and then have kind of like reliable data on how the colonies are removed. Yeah, and we can do that totally anonymously. For us, it is good to have the data. We are also kind of like, as you have seen, so our strategy is like twofold. So we have kind of performed ourselves a study of the density. Now with kind of like, when we get the data from the apartments, we have a different strategy to estimate the density, and then we can see whether both data sets confirm each other. The second is that we have started a survey by calling pest management and bee remover companies to kind of estimate kind of like how many kind of requests they get. And we could also kind of like, how to say, that survey kind of compare with the data that we are getting from BAF. And that would be strong, and that would be strong for us, because if we are planning to publish these data. And certainly before we publish the data, we can get back to you and kind of show you the manuscript, so that you are kind of seeing that we are not doing kind of bad things with your data or whatever.
And this is one of a kind initiative where the apartment owners are keen on trying to solve this problem in a more sensible way. Which I think that is what is very important.
And how to say, the study is unique. It's unique for the species. It's unique for Asia. There are studies, comparable studies on Apis mellifera in Europe, but nothing has ever been done on this honeybee. And how to say, the problem of Apis dorsata will be in all over Asia, as it kind of, the distribution is all over Asia and for all mega cities in Asia.
Yep, sure. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to host. There was one final point, H. Verma. He asked, I can help volunteer to get the data in some range. So you can reach out to me, and we have volunteer Swati and other team members of BAF CCC team, and we can take the next steps forward. So it's wonderful to have you on this talks show, BAF Ki Baat, Dr. Axel, Dr. Smita. It's wonderful. So we take this forward in terms of the survey. How can we make this recording available, and how we can upload the PDF, and how can we get more survey responses, and how can we take this forward together, right? So it's wonderful to have you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.